Hey YouTubers, welcome back to the channel. So for this video, and it's not just going to be today, it's probably going to be at least 2 days, we're going to be digging deep into the OM642 and having a look at the oil cooler seals. So this engine is 2014 and I was hoping that I had the new oil cooler seals. I'll put some pictures in the next bit of some of the leaks that I saw on the car, and pretty much I saw those when I was doing my annual oil changes, and that led me to the diagnosis that the oil cooler seal is leaking. So we're going to be digging in and digging deep and seeing if we can get down to that. Day one will be stripping down and day two will be building back up, and we'll see how we go. Just for your own diagnosis, what I had was oil on the under tray of the car when I went to do the oil change, and looking at where that oil came from, I deduced it was from the back of the engine. And pretty much the way it runs is the oil cooler's in the middle of the V and the oil runs back, and it runs typically down this side, and you'll see it running down near the dipstick tube down there and down onto the bottom of the sump, and then it spreads across the car and across all the rear cross member at the back of the engine. So that's where you get to see all the oil. We might see a bit of that as we go through, but pretty much that leads you to the conclusion that you're going to be having to either take it to a dealer or an independent or do it yourself, because it's just going to leak more and more and more and you're going to have oil everywhere. So looking at the list of works that we've got to do, this is how I've broken it down. So we're going to start with some prep work, which is draining off the coolant, the oil. I'm going to lower the suspension, which on my car is an air suspension, and then disconnect the battery just to stop that suspension rising while I'm doing the work. Then I'm going to get into all of the air pipes, so that's removing all of the air inlets. So both the air filters, the air central tube, and all of these pressure tubes running up from the turbo, including the resonator, and also the throttle body on the left-hand side there. So that's all part of this, is the air inlet. So all of these will be coming off first. Then I'm going to get into the PCV and the PCV pipe. So that's just at the back there. So while I've got everything apart, we'll get into that. Then I'm going to get into the EGR valve. So you've seen that in some of my previous videos. You can leave it on, but I'm just going to take it out just so that we can see how that works, and just look at that. And then we're going to be getting into the exhaust EGR cooler, which is coming up through the middle here, through this pipe, and sitting underneath this pipe, and then also the turbo and the exhaust. Once we've done all that, we'll move on to the fuel filter, the fuel lines, the fuel rail, and the wiring harness, which is pretty much all of this on this side and all of this on this side. So all of those pressure pipes for the fuel injectors, and the fuel feed, and maybe the glow plugs as well. And then finally, we should get down to the inlet manifolds and the oil cooler as the last step. So there's a few other things going to happen while we do that. So we're going to take off also the water hoses, might take off this vacuum hose, get that out of the way, take off a lot of these brackets, get those all out of the way. There's an engine bracket at the back there is going to come off, turbo bracket there, turbo cover, turbo pedestal, and exhaust. So quite a lot of work, and that's how I'm going to break it down into videos just to make sense of it. So it'll probably be those 6 or 7 videos, and then we'll stitch all those back together and then reassemble. So just some further parts of the prep, digging into the parts. So I went with this L-ring kit, so I'll put the part numbers in the description, but this is pretty good kit. I got it from Europe, and the reason it's good is it's all comes together. So we've got the inlet manifolds, we've got all of the oil seals, silicon seals, and the actual seals that are faulty, so the Viton seals. We've got all of the metal seals for the turbo and the turbo pipes and the exhaust. We've got some more exhaust seals. We've got the turbocharger outlet seals, inlets from the manifold, and then we've also got the copper bolts. So the copper bolts I did buy from Mercedes. The inlet joining coupling ring I bought from Mercedes. Also got a PCV valve. I bought the air swirl valve kit, repair kit, because I'm expecting that I'm going to get some fun when I get to that and see how we go for that. Got some lubricant, so the one on the left there, I've got a couple of those. That's an oil resistant RTV. I've got a exhaust seal to help push together the V flange on the turbo when we get to that. I've got a spanner, especially to undo the nuts on the top of the injectors. That should help out. I've got a digital torque wrench. I've got a scanner so that I can adjust the suspension. I'll show you that separately. A new set of clips and a crimping tool for the fuel filter new fuel filter, new air filters, new oil filter, new oil, some lubricants, so importantly some silicons, some lithiums and some degreasers, and some penetrants, then some e-sockets, and that's about it. So we should be good with those parts. It is important with this part list that you get every part you need. I'll put the list that I bought, and I hope I've got nothing missing or nothing breaks. Otherwise the car is definitely going to be off the road until I can go and pick something up. Okay, so let's get to the next step. So the first thing I'm going to do is jack the car up. I'm going to put it on a couple of these blocks, get underneath there and drain out the coolant first and then drain out the oil. And the reason for that is when you do drop some of these pipes, especially the radiator pipes and the heater pipe and the EGR pipe, you're going to get coolant leaking. And then when you take out all of the central parts, so the turbocharger and the oil cooler, you're going to get oil leaking. So it's a good time to change the oil. The coolant's pretty new, so I should be able to keep that quite clean if I get most of it out, and the rest of it can just sit in the block and shouldn't cause a problem if I do manage to plug up all of the holes successfully and not drop anything inside. One other bit of preparation I've already done is I have taken off the under trays, so they're already off under the car. I've taken off all the engine covers, and I will be taking out all of this bulkhead assembly. So I'll show some of the video of that where we get to the bolts, and I'll put all of those parts into the prep file, and then the disassembly, the main disassembly, will start in the next video. Okay, just got the impossible to undo tap open and got the coolant flowing down nicely into the bucket. Just had to undo the reservoir at the top there, the coolant tank, to let the vacuum go, and we're filling up nicely now. So I'm going to keep this in this bucket, just let it settle, and then I'll pour out the good stuff from the top, and if there's any sediment, just leave that in the bucket, not going back in the car. Just looking under the car, so this is the current state of the oil leak, so it's not too bad. I've just got it dripping down onto cardboard in the garage because it was driving me insane. Clean the floor every day, and so we'll just get the sump plug undone and get the oil drained. Okay, missed to get that just flowing out, but it's just overflowed over the back as usual, and just getting the last of that oil out. So luckily the cardboard's there, and that's going to keep that nice and clean. I did warm the engine up before so that the coolant was nice and circulated and the oil was nice and warm. So it needed an oil change, and it just got one. Okay, as per usual, we can have a look at the magnet on the drain plug. So this is the one that I put on in previous videos, and if we just look at that, there's just a bit of what you'd only describe as gooey metal gunk. So there's a grey metal from inside the engine, so maybe not aluminium, sorry, only steel, but there is a bit too much to be desired, but that's what you get for 12 months wear and tear. Okay, we'll get that back in and then get the car dropped down. Just to show you the fun experiment with that, oops, that is the oily mess that's out of the car, and this is the magnet that attracted it out of the oil. So good job, magnet, and best not to have that in the engine, but we'll see. So as part of the prep, you have to take some of these bulkhead covers down. So take off the seal. You don't need to take this piece out. I did that by mistake. Take off the seal, take off the top covers. Remember that you've got to change the cabin filter because it's disgusting. And then these center pieces come out, sorry, these side pieces come out. So these are held in by M8, a couple of M8 screws at the back there, and then a Torx 25 at the front. So the left one and the right ones come out like that, which makes a lot more room. The left hand one, it's only got, strangely, it's got a Torx in the top there and a M8 there, and then I also took out this pipe, which has got an M8 on it. So you just take this pipe out, which means you can pull all of this out, which just gets it out of the way. Just one less thing to worry about. Except I can't get it out. Get this pipe out of the way, and this pipe also comes out, if I remember. Wiggle it out in a minute, just to give yourself a bit more room as you're going down there towards the turbo. So the last step is just getting out this centerpiece, which I think you have to take that shield out. I can't quite remember, but we'll get that out in a second, and we'll just get the car prepped up. Okay, next out is the air inlet tubes. So to get those out, I just put a screwdriver under this front lip here, flip it up and pop them off. and then you just pull them off from the air filter housings, and they're out the way, so we'll get those off. As mentioned, we'll have a look at that in a moment, but we'll just get on to the next job first. So I've dropped the car down off the jacks, but as you can see, the suspension's still pretty high. So one thing I'm going to do to try and make my life easier is adapt the suspension height. So by going into the suspension system using my Vidant, I can adapt the level calibration. Can't remember if this is exactly the right order. As you can see, first of all, that's just going to lower it down to standard height. Just coming down, and then I'm going to try and drop the front springs down using these values. So let's just give that a go. Actually, the way to do it is to go into the active test, and then I think I can release the pressure in the left front. So it should be going down now. And there we go. There we go, so we're letting the suspension out. And the reason I'm doing that is just to make my life easier, so that all the time working this engine, I don't have to lean too far over the car. So it saves standing on a stool. So let's keep doing that. One cool trick you can do with electronic suspension and the air pressure. Okay, so pretty much got all of the air out of the front struts now, so the front's pretty much on the floor and the back's still in the high position. So I think I'm going to go with that just because it tilts the engine a bit towards me and should be a bit easier, but I'm sure I'll still be standing on a box at some point trying to get over there. Okay, so let's get to the next bit. Alright, so just using a 10mm spanner, you want to undo the 10mm nut on the terminal there and just lift the negative terminal off just so that the car's depowered, so the suspension won't move, but also if you have any trouble with any cables, you won't create any problems. So trying to get this centerpiece out so we can access the top of the turbo. I'll show you the fixings when I get it out, only to discover you have to take the wipers off. So that's 3 16mm to take the wiper blades off. Just ease them off carefully, and then I'm just trying to peel out the cowling seal. And the way I did that was just by getting in the top here, just very carefully, we're pushing down on that and creating a small gap, and then lifting it up, and then I'm sliding that spatula across just to pop that out. So we'll get that out and then have a look. All right, so wipers are out. They come out with a E12. It's 3 bolts, and then there's also a 10mm bolt, which is just sitting here in this bracket, and you carefully take out the wire connector. So there's a clip on the bottom of the wire connector there, and then you also have to lift it over the windscreen connector, which you also have to pop out. What I found is it was easier to take these out and pop this out so I could see what I was doing with the connector. And then there's this fixing up here, and the 2 fixings in the center, and then just carefully lift it away from that cable, and the wiper assembly is out. So I did manage to get the center cover out. It was a little bit of brute force. This is very strange and might be removed on the way back in, but basically that was still catching up under there, and this bracket doesn't bend out the way much even with the wipers off, and you're pulling over the top of this heat shield, which also doesn't seem to want to get out the way. But overall, the 2 10mm fixings go in the top there, and then looking at the back of it, the foam seal is a bit stuffed up, unsurprisingly. It's fixing on the left, fixing on the right, and it's out the way. Okay, I might be gluing that back on or leaving that off. We'll see how we go. So pretty much we're at the end of part 1. We've drained the coolant, we've drained the oil, lowered the suspension, disconnected the battery, and then what wasn't on that list, but I will add it, was removing all of the bulkhead and windscreen wipers so that we can get access to the top of the engine. So I'm pretty happy with that, so I'll call that stage 1 complete, and now we'll be moving on to stage 2. So first thing is going to take out all the air pipes across the top of the engine, and then probably have to take off this coolant pipe to access some of these turbo inlet pipes. So we'll get all of that out of the way, and that will give us a lot more access to the front end and the top of the engine. So first step of that is going to be just taking off the air cleaners. So that's these fixings here. You can take these off, which is the actual air cleaner. Take out these fixings, undo the fixing to the turbo, and the same on the other side. And then taking out the sensors, so both the pressure sensor and the air flows there and there, and then we should be good. So I'll get on with that and show you what that looks like disassembled. Okay, so the back wings are off. I took out the whole air filters. They just clip into those two rubber bungs at the bottom there, and two screws at the top. So one here and one here, same on the other side. And looking at the amount of oil, so that central seal was completely toast. I left it too long. I think I'm going to change it every year now and change it with my oil services. So my idea of my rag seems to have worked somewhat, but still leaked through, and we've got a lot of oil on top of the harness there. So we'll get that cleaned up a little bit and plug the turbo, and then we'll keep going. So I removed a couple of pipes at the front just to make a bit of room. So I've taken out the water pipe out of this clip. This metal clip just pops up, and I've tucked the water pipe out over there. I've taken off this water bleed, which comes off just with this metal clip. So I've pulled that back. You have to twist the tube just to get it to break free. And then I did get my first failure. So I had this little clip fail. So I've got to order up one of those. I went into that bracket. Just make a bit more room, took off the turbo cover. So that's just those three fixings there on the back of the turbo, 1, 2, 3. I was going to take this bracket off, but I just can't quite get to those bolts. But instead I'm taking off this bracket, so just pulling out these three connectors and taking off this bracket. And then just with this, I have to use my 8mm socket to get down to that E down there. Just not quite enough room, so we'll get that bracket out of the way, tuck it down here, and that will give us access to the PCV. Hey YouTubers, welcome back to the channel. So this is just a quick video showing you changing the PCV valve. So I have done a lot of other work. I'm doing the oil cooler seal at the moment, but in general, all you have to do is remove your back wing across the center, your air filter on this side, which is off the main fixings. So you get that all out of the way. You remove this bracket here, which is on 2 bolts. They're a bit tricky, but here and here gives you a lot of room. You have to remove the bulkhead inlet. Just have a look at my video on the oil cooler and you'll see how to get to all of that stage. And now we're going to take the PCV off, which is just these 2 bolts here. So they're really hard to get to. They're at the back of the engine, and we'll get down in there. There's one on the left-hand side and the other one is behind this tube here. So we'll get some tools and get onto that. Here is the new one. Here's what it looks like from the back side. So this is the one that's really hidden. This is the one that's a bit easier to see. So we'll get a couple of tools onto that, and then we'll be able to get that out. It fits in with that O-ring there, and it fits in over the end of the camshaft with that seal, which is a bit tricky to get on, so you probably want to lube that up a little bit, maybe warm it up just to get that back on. Okay, so both PCV bolts out now. The way I do that is using a 1/4" spanner with an adapter into a socket, and that's an 8mm socket, which fits just over the top of the E bolt. So it just means you've just got a lot of shorter play. I do have some ratchets, can't find them right now, that would do that job really well. But nevertheless, once you get it started, it does come out pretty easy. So these both were just loosen the threads there. Okay, so then to get it off, you just wiggle it, and it should wiggle off the back of the camshaft. Okay, it was in really tight as usual. So I actually had to put a screwdriver on this side and this side and lever it out. It's a little worn. It's not too bad. We'll just compare in a second to the new one, sorry. And it gives us a little bit more room just to play around there while we're there in the engine. So you can see now reasonably big difference. Looks like it's worn off a lot of the rubber there, which is normal. And the new one should be really hard to get on, but we'll see how we go. And I was thinking, I've got to decide, but I might reuse the old pipe because the new pipe comes with this circlip rather than this clamp. So I'm not sure which is better quality, but I really don't like this kind of idea going on here. So the sensor doesn't normally fail, the seal does, but definitely this seal is what we're interested in changing. Hey YouTubers, welcome back to the channel. So this is just a quick little side video about the EGR. So I'm here busy doing the oil seal in the oil cooler and getting everything off, but as one part of that, I'm just going to take the EGR valve off. So there's two fixings, one's here on the back. A bit harder to see. If I just reach over, you should be able to see that one there. There we go. Take the connector off the back, and then the hard bit is getting it out. So I'm going to be putting the chisel in here like I did the last time, just trying to get it started and then try and rotate it and take it out. I'll just take this bolt out the way, give myself a little bit more room. That's the turbo bracket bolt. So what's difficult is that it's very, very tight in there. I've taken off all of the bulkhead, which makes things a lot easier. So you can take off this bulkhead panel on this side, and that's not too hard to do. The center one is really, really hard, and that gives you a lot more room to get in there. And then I've also taken off all of the back wing and the air filters. So clearly there's not a lot else going on. So let's get the chisel in there and see how we go. Okay, so just hammered away a little bit with the chisel there. You do cause a little bit of damage both to the metal seal and to the housings, and you do need to clean that up obviously to get it to sit down, but you can see it's already started to lift up, which is how I get it started. And eventually you can get a screwdriver just under this edge or in the middle there, and as you start to push, you can now start to actually get some proper purchase and really start to see it coming out all there. So I'll put in that and get that out. Okay, so we managed to get it out. We did mangle that corner a little bit, and you can see the seal's still in pretty good condition and it didn't come off the engine, so I'm just going to leave that in place. You can see here the water pipe. So you do have to take the water pipe off. I'll show you that on the valve. So you do have to get this clip. It's pretty tricky. A lot easier for me with all of those parts removed. So you slide it up the pipe, and then when you take the valve out, that's when you pull it off the steel pipe. Same in reverse. And again, all of this is just caked up with a bit of carbon. So you just have to wiggle and wiggle and get it out. The seal looks okay, so I'm going with that seal. Don't think I've got a spare. So we'll get this cleaned up and I will just give it a quick test as well. So I did get a bit ahead of myself. I've got the EGR connected up and I was hoping I could actuate it with my scanner, but unfortunately my scanner says that you have to have the engine running. And if I press open, and then nothing happens. It's a bit weird, but never mind. We can try that when the engine's running, and I did try it before and it did just make the engine shut down. It said you can hear the motor running when the engine's running, but good luck with that. Okay, so we'll get that cleaned up, and then when it gets time to put it back together, I'll show you how I get that back in. Okay, so we've got this pressure pipe off now, so there's one fixing here. There's one fixing here at the front on this ring. So it's hard to see there on the ring. That goes onto the resonator there, and then you have to take the resonator off. So there's this fixing here, which I'll put back in, and there's this fixing here, which goes in the side of the resonator. So as I go, I'm putting all of the bolts back in the block, just loose where I can, just so I don't mix them up, because there are quite a few different lengths of those Torx bolts. There's E-bolts, and then this bracket I've just taken off, so this one comes out here. I took out these ones and took this whole bracket off. Not sure if you need to do that, but anyway, it means this ECU's out the way, and it means you can get to the other fixings. So same, just put all the bolts back in. This I took off just a bit earlier. This is the resonator, sits on top of here. So it's got one fixing here, and I think one other fixing. No, just maybe the one fixing anyway. You pull that out, and that is over here. So that's the one that sits in here like that. That's right, yeah, it has got that one other fixing. Just goes through into that bracket, into that bolt there. Okay, so we'll get rid of all of that, and then we'll start getting off this mixing chamber across the front here. I'm just going to leave that resonator just hanging down there. We'll just put something in that tube, because otherwise I've just got to take that turbo pipe off, which is much the same. So next I've taken out the two bolts in the C here. There's one here and one at the bottom on this metal bracket. I've taken out these 4 bolts here, so one at the top, which I've put over to the right, one at the bottom, one here and one here. They're all loose, ready to go. I've taken out these 2 bolts out of the exhaust return tube, so that's ready to be loosened. And now I'm taking out the fuel filter. So you have to remove the 2 clips, take off the power connector, and then take out this bolt, this bolt, this bolt, and loosen this Allen key 5mm at the back there. Okay, finally got it out. The problem I had was the pipes are never removed, 10 years more on that tube, so just trying to get a twist on them and get some pull was really difficult. So what I did at the end was put a screwdriver down in here and put some pressure on the pipe, pulling it away, and that really helped out. And then I managed to get a screwdriver just in the back just to break the seal a little bit, and off we go. Okay, I finally got the front pipe out. So those 2 bolts were loose, those were completely undone, but this has got an O-ring on the back of it, was just causing a huge amount of grief. Hopefully it goes back together well. Took out all the long bolts out of there, so they're all different lengths, and also took out this diesel fuel pipe, pushed that over to that side, which was tucked underneath there. Okay, let's get that out and have a look. Okay, last thing I had to do is take off this vacuum hose. So I decided to take it off this sensor or control because it just looked like it was less likely to break if I took that off there. So I'll leave all that on the car for the moment, and we'll get to the next bit. What is interesting, so my orange seal is here, that just fell off, and the second seal I think is there on the left, and then bizarrely this seems to just push onto the EGR, which is a very weird way of having that connected. And the last thing, the gasket has remained on this piece here, so I have got that gasket new. But this is the state of my build-up. It's not too bad, it's not great, but we will be cleaning that up and getting some of that soot out, and the same on these tubes when we get in there. Okay, I got the 3 turbo pipe bolts out. They are super difficult, especially the one at the bottom. You can't see what you're doing, but now time to get these triangular bolts out. What's interesting on mine is that I've got a V-band clamp on the bottom of the EGR pipe, which is a bit different, but we'll see how we go. Theory, if I take that off the manifold and take those 6 bolts out, it should all just lift out, in theory. Apart from the pedestal bolts, which I have managed to crack off, they're T45s and really tricky to get to. Okay, let's see. Okay, I pushed on a little bit, so I got the 6 bolts out of the bottom. I got the V-band off the EGR pipe and the 2 bolts from the top. I'd already got the 3 bolts out from the exhaust and already taken out the sensor. And then I took out the 2 bolts on the pedestal and the 2 bolts on the back, and with a lot of struggle or wiggling, got the turbo out. I did have problems with the O-ring here. I did take that sensor off, which I think really helps. So I would recommend you do that if you're going to do it. And I'm a bit undecided because whilst on the one hand there's a lot of oil here, there's not a lot of oil here. So is my oil cooler leaking, or was it just the turbo dripping down onto the harness and the sensor? Anyhows, we'll get it all cleaned up. We're going to get probably the manifolds out. The servo motor does still work, or at least does still turn, and so do the slides on the swirl flaps, but they do stick a bit there. So I think a lot of cleanup. Probably get the manifolds off, clean them up. They are disgusting. I've already cleaned up the mixer pipe, so that took a lot of cleaning, and I have got that looking pretty sparkling. You can see there is nothing in there now. I used oven cleaner to melt the carbon out, and hopefully that hasn't caused any problems. But we'll see how we go. All right, let's keep going. Right, so next up on the list is removing the pedestal. I'll be taking out those 4 bolts there to get the pedestal out the way, and then I'm going to move on to the wiring harnesses and the connectors and then the fuel rails, and then we should be just about there. Let's see how we go. All right, finally got to this stage. So I did have to take out the left-hand fuel rail, all of the bleed backs from the injectors, all of the injector wiring, all of the sensor wiring. On the right-hand side, I had to do the same. I've got a leak there on the top, and I don't know what that leak is, but it's annoying, and I saw that one before, and it's really hard to say. Maybe it's the O-ring. There is no O-ring. Okay, so not sure what that leak is, but we'll see if we can work it out. And then on this side, also had to take out the fuel rail, had to take out all of the bleed backs, and also had to take this fuel pipe off, the fuel return, which is a real pain the way they'd nested those cables. We'll see how we can get all that back. So now we're good to get on with the manifold. Right, so one thing I found useful is this is the new gasket, and if you can see there's 6 screws at the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 4 at the bottom, 1, 2, third one's a bit hard to see, it's that little notch, and 4 down there, and you can do the same on the car. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, except I can't count. Yeah, and this 6th one's not used on this side. And then on the bottom, 1 at the back, 2, 3. And the 4th one's the bottom of the thermostat. And now on this side the same. So there's 1 hiding in there, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And at the bottom, 1, 2, 3. And a couple just hiding in those little tunnels down there. So that's just a good check to see that you've got the right gasket, but also that you've taken out all of the manifold bolts. Let's get those out. So all the manifold bolts are out now. I'm just going to loosen these 2 on the swirl valve motor, and then use the trick of the cable ties or the bungees pulling everything together to try and pull it away from the block before we lift it out. So the only other thing to note is the size of the bolts. So on the left hand side, all the top bolts are the same size. Bottom bolts, there's 2 medium ones at the back, and the longest one goes through the thermostat at the front at the bottom. I think that's just missing one off the top of there. Same on this side. So 4 on the left, so all the mediums and a short one at the back. That's not right, is it? So, okay, we're gonna have to put that over there, that over there. So there we go. So medium ones, the longer short one at the back, longer short one at the back, and then 3 small ones at the front. Okay, that looks a bit better, but still not quite right. Okay, fix that up. So these 4, 5 go across the top on the left-hand side, 1 at the bottom, and then 2 mediums and the super long one through the thermostat. And then on the right-hand side, 3 medium length bolts, 1 slightly longer one at the back and the top, and then 2 missing because they're on the engine mount. So those 2 there, and then 3 short ones at the front, and we're good to go. So I did forget the water pipe, and I was going to take it off the manifold, but I did read that somebody had a manifold where that popped out, so I decided to take it off on this fitting up here. It's interesting, this fitting seems to be leaking a little bit. I think it's a bleed valve, so I'm going to leave that alone. I did get this off successfully, but the clips, they sort of self-latch, and I don't know how you unself-latch those, so I've got to try and work that out. Nevertheless, we are ready to lift it out. We've got the cable ties on the front and the middle. Seems to be enough to hold it away from the block. You can see there's a gap on both sides. Should be good to come out now. Okay, manifold is out, ready for a cleanup. So we'll be getting that all cleaned out shortly. And now we get to C in the V, and maybe as I thought, it's only leaking from the top, and that's why there's oil on top of the cooler. There's not that much oil around the cooler, but nevertheless we'll be changing the seals, putting it all back together, getting it cleaned up. And then for the inlets, we're going to have to be careful there. I'm not sure how I can turn the engine, to get the valves closed, because some of those are really disgusting. But we're going to try a couple of techniques to see if we can get that cleaned up. Okay, and so we're out, and purple seals it was. So as I thought, the leak was coming from the top, but nevertheless, I've cleaned all the ports. I sucked those out with a vacuum cleaner, and then I got in there with some degreaser, and they're looking pretty clean and shiny now. So I'm happy with that, and we'll get this cleaned up and start to get reassembled. Just one interesting thing is that the water is here on my right hand side. So here it is on the block on the left hand side, oil's on the right. So if you do have an oil leak, it's going to be on the right hand side of the oil cooler. The left hand side will be a water leak. Okay, let's get this all cleaned up and then we can start reassembling. Okay, so we've got the manifold cleaned up. The way I did that was with oven cleaner and also degreaser, and then the pressure washer, which is a little unconventional, but I think it's come up pretty good. Certainly I've got there's a little bit left on the flaps. Flap motor working well. A little bit of crud on the flaps, but it's really baked on, so I don't know. I'm probably not going to take that off. What I'm going to do now is separate the two halves, so I'll take off the cable ties and I'm going to undo this screw here, which will take that link away. So the motor I'll keep on this half and the EGR I'll keep on that half. And that way I'll be able to replace the water coolant tube. One other thing that you don't see on the videos too much is just how this gasket works. So there's a couple of little spikes there and they just clip into that hole just like that and push down. So that's what keeps it in place while you're dropping it in. So that's the old one. So let's get that disassembled. Okay, so the two halves separated nicely. Taking off this clip, the advantage of that is I don't have to disturb any of these clips, which on mine are all okay. Nothing's broken and the motor still turns freely, so I'm just going to leave that well alone. I might test the motor when I've got things half assembled and electrical back together. So this is the coupling, where Mercedes seem to want to always sell you a brand new coupling. Now I will say that O-ring is in better condition than the one that I'm taking out, but at the end of the day, why not just sell two O-rings? I mean, really. Still, it was only 20 bucks, so. Here is the old one, still in, and it's pretty tight. And those O-rings, they don't look too flat. But after hearing everybody else have leaks on that seal, then we're going to be putting the new one in before we reassemble. So again, the advantage pulling that linkage apart. So here's the other half of the linkage. Only one disadvantage, and that's the little spring. So you've got to be careful not to lose this little spring and get the screw. And I'm not sure if there is a set condition where they're meant to go back, but we'll try and work that out when we put it together, or we'll just put it back where it was when we started. Okay, so the new seal's back in. I have put a little bit of RTV on those. That might be controversial, but I don't want this leaking again. So we're ready to go in and we'll get that in and get that torqued down. Okay, cooler back in and torque set to 12. Don't know if I can do this one-handed. There we go. So all of those set to 12, and that's Newton meters. I don't know if you can see that. And we're all good. All right, so new gaskets back on. All loosely tied together with the cable ties. So all of these bolts are loose here on the motor. So that means that this end is pulled together quite a lot more than it needs to be. One thing I did notice with this aluminium coupling, it's really important to try and get these two bits of aluminium lined up. They should line up on the engine, but the reason that that pipe kinks is because these get out of whack. So one gets high, one gets low, or forward and backwards. And so it definitely helps with the cable tie around these two, but you can still get some deviation. You can see that there, just there, some deviation, which means that aluminium pipe is kinked inside the pipe. Now, the other thing I did do is I did put lubrication on those O-rings, both the inside and the outside of the O-ring, and inside those tubes. That was the only way to easily get that in. So with that lubrication, should settle down and take a set once it warms up. Okay, let's lift this in. Right, Right, so back in, just very carefully lifted it in. Just made one little mistake, didn't take that bolt out, which I do need to do, or did need to do, to drop it down in. So it's all nicely in. The motor's all really loose now. Just loosen that up. And I'm just put all the bolts in, all 20 bolts are in and screwed down just loose from the manifold. And you can see the manifolds just nicely floating around now. And that cross pipe is just sweet. So we'll get these cable ties off and lower it down and just nip those up and have a look what that looks like. So I've put the pedestal back in. Just show you that. So those 4 bolts are tightened down. They go down to 12 Newton meters, and all of the manifold bolts are in there. They are 16 Newton meters. So next, before the turbo goes in, is to get all this wire harness and fuel pipes back, and then we can move on to getting the turbo on top of that. It is a bit of a crazy design because you can see the mechanism there, all looking pretty good. But once everything's back in, you can't get to any of that. Let's keep going. So progress, just some hints and tips on getting to this stage. So I reinstalled the wire harnesses and the fuel rails. That mostly went to plan with a couple of exceptions. One is this return line's pretty tricky. It has to go down the back of this fuel rail, so I didn't quite get that right first time. This hose has to be finished off, and this one as well, before you can get this front hose in. Tightening up the injectors was a nightmare, so I tightened them all to 20 Newton meters, and then they definitely weren't going to go 60 degrees, so I gave them about another 20 degrees more, and they seem pretty tight. So we're going to call that good and see what happens. Everything electrical I dry assembled, so they're not all clipped down, all the screws are still loose. Got the fuel filter in. Couldn't get to this fuel injector, so you have to leave the harness loose. So the fuel injectors go in before the harness, and the front fuel feed, the main fuel feed, I think that is, from the pump. Got to get that on, and then we're good. So we're just going to reuse these clips. I know they say don't do that, but I'm just going to clip those over. They'll get done up, and then we'll be ready to put this front fuel pipe on, and finally probably put the turbo on before finishing off all those electrical connectors. So let's move on to that stage. Oh, one more thing. I've got to do that water pipe before I do the turbo. I've got to do the main water pipe off the back of the manifold there. Otherwise there'll just be no room to get in there with the EGR there. Okay, let's get to that next bit. All right, it's time to reassemble the EGR. So I've got the 2 bolts, got the pipe. Pipe goes on first before you offer it down. Reusing the O-ring because I don't have a new one. I'm reusing the gasket because I don't have a new one. And if it leaks, you would see some smoke puffing out. So it's kind of going to leak smoke out of there. Or if the gasket leaks, you could be seeing water leaking out from here. So that'd be what you'd be looking out for. But just looking at the mechanism, like before, cleaned that up. So I might put some light lubrication on there. So the way it works is this lever goes up and down, and that's what pushes the valve in and out. So you can test that when it's running, and you can open that up, and that lets more exhaust into the inlet. So that's the exhaust pipe on that side, and it lets it out through this valve here into the inlet, and then it goes down through the EGR system. So this cover just clips on, so I'll put that back on, put the valve back in place, and we should all be good. All right, time to get the turbo in. So I've got the new gaskets down there ready to go. One thing I did do with the turbo is take off the actuator, and I've lubricated up the water fitting and also the water fitting hole, and we should be good to go putting it on the pedestal. I did put a bit of sealant on the gasket, on the new gasket on both sides, and if I'm lucky, this will just about drop in. We'll see how we go. Back in a moment. So that went so easily. The way I put it in was, if you imagine you go in like this and put the ear underneath the exhaust and then just roll it round like that and drop it down and drop the water hose into the water hose fitting. Got the bolts ready to drop into the turbo, and the brackets all lined up at the back there. And the real trick for me, and I 100% recommend this to you, is taking off the actuator. We'll see how it is getting it back on, but that allowed me to roll it, whereas before it was just smashing down on that inlet manifold. Okay, let's get the bolts in. So all 4 bolts on the turbo tightened up now. So both the back bracket bolts down there and the front bolts there and there. And we're good to go. So now to get the yokes onto the inlet manifolds, so the exhaust manifolds. So just looking at that, these are the old bolts. So they are steel. Sorry about the flashing from the light there. And maybe I can fix that a bit better. They're steel, so the 3 into the turbo elbow and the 6 into the inlet exhaust manifolds. And then the same, these are the new ones, and they're all copper. And I know they're stretch bolts, and I know there's a special way to tighten them up, but I don't understand what is wrong with the steel bolts. If anybody could enlighten me on the chat, that would be good. Just to share, this is how I make sure I don't drop the bolts when I put them back in. So any of the bolts are in a bit of a tough situation. I've just got this little flex, and these hold onto it pretty tight, so that there's less chance of me having to go under the car or fish it out from down the engine. So not many disasters yet, and we'll get the last ones in. So all 6 of the bolts are now in, the copper bolts in the Y pieces, and I've got the socket on there, down on that one there, and I've done them all up to the 20 Newton meters as recommended, and then the spec calls for another 90 degrees. Now I'm going to give it a go, but I don't know what torque that'll top out at, and it scares the bejesus out of me if I break one of those off. So we'll just give it a try, see what's happening, and probably go with half of the 90. But that's what the book calls for. 20 Newton meters plus 90 degrees, which is 1/4 of a turn. And I'm just going to use the big breaker bar and see where we get to. Right, I'd say they're all tight now. I took them all up to 20, which seemed to settle them down. What was interesting was they were still slightly different when I took them higher. I turned them maybe through the 90 degrees. I would say, if we're talking about from here, probably more like from here to about here. So maybe 60 degrees. And the value I took them up to, I was measuring it with the gauge, was about 40 Newton meters. So in the end, I just set the gauge to 40 and took them all to 40. And I'll do the same. I'm going to leave them for overnight, and then I'll just make sure they're all 40 again tomorrow. Maybe a little bit more than 40, but I'm not going harder. When I did undo them, I needed the full bar to break the steel ones off. And being as those are copper, I'm not fancying they're quite as strong. So we'll just go with that, and we'll keep going and get the elbow on after we've tightened those up. Time to put the EGR pipe on. Definitely had trouble with this because I lost these 2 bolts, but that's what they look like. It was really confusing because of the way they go into the manifold, and I have just put some exhaust sealant either side of that gasket, and especially around this gasket, just to keep things in place while I assemble it. So it's kind of optional. I decided it was a good idea. I don't want it leaking. It might be a bit tricky to crack it off next time, but we'll see how we go. So EGR all tightened up. I must say that bolt at the bottom there on the V-bend clamp and the bolt on the far side of the EGR are a nightmare. So the way I did both of those, just in case you have trouble doing that, is you can use an 8mm spanner on the bolts. So this does fit just nicely on the top. I'll show you on that one. There you go. So you can use an 8mm spanner. Works out really well. I used my little 8mm ratchet just to crank them in. I used an 8mm on this little ratchet, and this is quite good because you can at least spin this with your fingers and get those in. And then if you all else fails, your E10 I've got there on a 1/4 to 3/8 adapter, so that I can use my small socket. But even then, sorry, ratchet. But even then, that wouldn't fit in. So good luck, and tell me how you did it. Onto the turbo elbow now. So in case you're interested, that's how the gasket goes. So the little plastic pin goes at the top, just there in the turbo, and then everything else down below. A bit hard to see, and maybe I'll take it around this way. You might be able to see what's going on if you didn't remember which way around it is. So there's those 2 holes there. So we'll get the gasket on, get the bottom bolt in, which has got a slot on the elbow, so that you don't need to worry about that, and then get the top 2 bolts in. All right, time to get the actuator back on. So I'm going to put a bit of Loctite on the 3 bolts, get that back on, and put the little clip back on, after putting a lot of protection underneath in case I drop it. So let's see how that goes. So the actuator went on okay. It's not ideal taking those bolts out. Probably even a bit harder taking them out when they're on the car, but it was still top notch in terms of making life easy for me. Just then put the sensor back in, that gas sensor, might be an O2 or a NOx sensor. So just to note, that's a 22 spanner, and the 22 will fit over the connector going all the way down there. And then also put that exhaust pressure for the bypass on the EGR. That's a 24, so again, put that back in. Well recommend you take that out. So definitely take out those 2 sensors and that little controller, and it'll give you a lot more room. So now we can move on to getting the PCV back in. Okay, so the PCV's prepped. I did end up putting the old pipe onto the new valve. You can see the new valve has got a really much less worn entry port there. I'll just get the other one. Okay, so on the left hand side is the old one. You can see it's worn quite a bit off the rubber, so that's probably only about 20 mil, and it's more like 30 mil, maybe 20 and 25, and that's completely worn away, the lip on that rubber, or folded in. So not sure if that's where it does leak or if the diaphragm fails on the inside. You can see the red diaphragm there, but nevertheless we'll stick the new one on and see if we get less oil in the inlet pipe. What can be tricky is getting this on, so I have lubed this up with a kind of a silicone grease, and I've also put that on the outside on the O-ring, especially to try and get that to drop in. And I do know it's really hard to get it started, but if you get it squared up nicely, you can use the threads to try and pull it in. Okay, so PCV back in. Pretty tricky. It seemed a bit tight, this one, into the fitting there. I don't know if it was the oil seal or if it was the aluminium. But nevertheless, got it in. Would recommend you leave that sensor out just while you put it in if you have taken it out, because it was a bit of a pain in the way. And the way I got the bolts in, this time I was just using the 8mm ratchet, which worked out really well. So definitely get yourself one of these, and a few bucks if you are going to be doing that, and then you can just get it on. I'll just show you, just like that, and ratchet away to your heart's content. Much easier than using a socket or a mini socket and or any kind of E-fitting. Okay, let's move on to the next step. All right, I did forget to put in that turbo sensor, which is a bit annoying because it would have been easier when that elbow was off and also when this actuator was off, but nevertheless got that back in. That was the one that I changed in a previous video, you'll see, and that just tucks under and goes into there, which is why I was wondering why I had a loose connector. All right, with all that finished and tightened up, we can move on to the front of the engine. So let's get to the next step. So I was just getting ready to assemble the front of the engine when I thought I'd tear down a few of these bits and find out what was really going on inside. And what a mess. Everything is covered in coke. I was just trying to clean this bit up, which goes inside the inlet tube, but I'll get it all cleaned up and I'll show you which bits to pull apart and how to clean it. Okay, all stripped down and all cleaned up. Not quite as nice as I'd like to. I really wish I'd pulled it apart before. Highly recommend you pull apart, at the very least, this joint and this valve set. So I've got this really nice and clean now. That was really, really carbonated. So even with the actuator now, it's all nice and clean inside there. This pipe was really, really bad inside the end of the pipe. This little injectors kind of thing for the exhaust was absolutely packed out. You might have seen that in the video. This tube was really gunked, needed a good clean, and the worst was still inside this pipe, even though I had cleaned it quite a lot, and it is now pretty sparkling. I think I might have missed a tiny bit on that corner, but otherwise pretty clean. Okay, so I'll get that reassembled. I won't show you every detail there. I took this sensor off, but just take yours apart carefully, note where all the screws go, and I'll put that back together and we can start getting that back on the engine. The other thing is I did get some new seals in the kit, and a couple of those are used in this assembly. And then there is another one of those wobbly seals, and I didn't get a spare one of those, so won't be putting that one in. But those are all the fixings. They're pretty obvious where they go, but I'll try and get them right and get it reassembled. Okay, so ready to go back in now. So I got these bolts back in. Boy, did I forget which way around this goes, but this motor goes on the top side next to the hole for the resonator. This bolt with the Torx drive goes through, and then these ones with the flats, they're the other three, they go under. And then this one goes on the top along with its sister one. They're loose because they're the ones that go on the bracket. This one goes in tight. These three, this one's a short one, these two are long ones, and this one's a long one. So they all go in and go through that little trumpet and bolt that down, work that out after a bit of thinking. Got this gasket ready to go, but it falls off, so I'll put that in once everything's in the car pretty much together. And then I've got a new seal on here, and then on the other side I'll put a new O-ring on the car. So that is on the end of the manifold, just there. Now the old one was very flat, and I was going to reuse it, but this one's very round, so I think I will have a bit of trouble getting that on. So again, lube that up, I'll lube that surface up, I've got to lube that pipe up with that O-ring, and hopefully after a bit of wiggling, it'll go on. So I had put all of the bolts back in the end trumpet here, and also on the pipe here. The only way I can get this pipe to engage, and you can just see it down there, just try and get the light on it, you can just see the O-ring, just that sort of browny, light brown colour. The only way I could get that to engage is by taking out two of the bolts on the bracket here, so the two long bolts that go all the way through into the housing. Very little out of focus. So this one here and the one behind it, I've got to get those back in. I just left this last one in just here. I'll just put the camera down there so you can see that, hopefully. You can see which bolts I took out, and by doing that, that's just allowed a little bit of twist on this pipe. You can just see the flange there, which has allowed that to start that engagement, and now I can push it forward. I don't know how you're meant to get it on otherwise, but it's a good thing to know, because if you take those bolts out when you're disassembling, it'll be a lot easier to take it off. Right, it's all back in and tightened up. So these two bolts are in on the bracket now. These three bolts, two bolts are in, and the third bolt's tightened up on here, and these two bolts are in here with the gasket in there. So pretty much done. Just connected a few connectors. So the actuator for the throttle valve, this is the glow plug amplifier or power supply, so those two connectors go in there. And then there is this little tricky connector down here, which is actually a plug that clips in to the inlet manifold, and there's a little temperature sensor on there. So I didn't actually clean that up, it looked okay, so left that as it was. So pretty much done there. Next job is to get this very wobbly bracket onto the top of here to hold this glow plug unit in position, and then we're really making some progress. Just on the top, also put that bracket back on, that engine lift bracket. And I do need to tighten up all the bolts on top of the engine and just make sure they're good, and then we can get this resonator back in and this turbo pipe. Get the water pipe back on the coolant, that one there, and get this turbo inlet back on, and then we're pretty much on top of the engine, just getting the air stuff back together. So we'll get on with that soon. Alright, so left turbo hose back on, just getting the resonator in, put the new seal, the new green seal on the turbo outlet, and was just playing just to get this return hose in the right location, which is a bit of a pain. It goes just behind that bolt, which I didn't quite remember, and we can get the tube back on. All hoses back in, all tightened up and ready to go. So now we move on to the air cleaners. So the old air cleaner is not too bad, it's not great. Can't remember the date I changed that, but I do have a record somewhere. With the new air cleaners, one thing you do need to do is to swap over this air pressure sensor. That's the same one that we saw earlier in the inlet manifold, just on the front there. And that goes in the top up here. So we'll get that in, we'll get the air boxes back on and screwed down, get the filters screwed in, and then we can move on to getting the bat wing back together. Right, air filters back in and clamped them up. Did have one problem there, I ordered the wrong seal for the turbo, so I will be taking that off and doing that again. And as before, I will be putting my cloths underneath or trying to work out a mechanism of capturing that oil when it does drip down from the turbo inevitably. So other than that, just put some coolant in. It overflowed because there's air bubbles everywhere, so I'll put the rest of that in once we've got it running. And now doing the oil change, so just got the oil filter undone, and I'm going to jack the car up, just drain out the last bit of oil, run some fresh oil through the filler and through the filter, just to let that flow down and see if we can wash anything out, and then we should be good to get closer to a start. So I've put a bit of fresh oil down through the cam case, and I've also put the new filter in and pre-oiled that as best I could on the outside, so the engine won't start hopefully straight off because of the fuel. So that means that it should just crank and get that oil pressure up and hopefully flow some of the oil around the different parts we've had apart. So we'll see how we go. Interestingly, the amount of oil I got out, even though some of this is new oil that I put through the engine, but even when I pulled the drain plug out after taking out the cooler and everything, the amount of oil I got out of the engine was quite a lot. So we'll be getting rid of that, but I don't know why I didn't get it out when I drained it the first time. Anyway, it's out now and it's all fresh going in. Okay, so I think after a couple of more checks, it should be the moment of truth to see how we go. But even if it does fire, it doesn't fire, I'll be shutting it down straight away and checking the oil and topping up the water. So I topped up the water, checked the oil, and put the battery on charge, and we'll give it another go. So that was 10 seconds, and I might give it another one crank and then we'll look for any other problems. So we'll give it one more try and then we might look at the scanner and see what's happening with the codes. Just looking at the codes, hopefully you can see this. So the engine has 5 codes stored. They're all historic. Not sure why, because we did have the battery off while all of those were disconnected, but we will just clear those. And then also the shift module has a whole group of faults. I'm not sure why. I'll show you those. So it has all of these faults on it. And again, they're all stored, lots of data missing faults. So we'll clear all those and get those erased, and then we'll start again and give it another crank. One more crank. Okay, so we're getting low pressure on the rail pressure. Not sure why that is. I did connect everything back up, I believe, so I'll check over a few things and then we'll also clear all codes and give it another go. One more crank. I didn't do anything different there, just cranked it about 8 times and it seemed to be running pretty smooth, and went into that cold start and started to change the warm start. I stopped it just because I want to check the coolant and check the oil, and then we'll give it another go. So I just did a full scan and these are the results. Sorry if you can't see that. Don't know if you can. Jeez, pretty hard to get that in a view where you can see what's going on. There we go. Okay, so hopefully you can see that there's a suspension fault, a SAM fault, radar fault, and a 360. But the good news is none of those are really to do with the engine. So we're all good and sweet on that. So I'm going to erase all of those and then we'll check the oils and give it another go. Okay, happy with that. So I'm just going to start it again, let it run through a little bit warmed up, and then we'll get on with the rest of the reassembly. Looking at the temperature from my flow gun, you can see the turbo warming up. The rest of the engine's still pretty cold at the moment. So it's warming through. Okay, so we took that up to about 100 Celsius on the turbo. A few things smoking off just now, bits of oil, stuff like that. You could hear the throttle actuator working away, and everything seems to be in order. So we'll get on with the wiper reassembly and maybe we'll get this back on the road. So here's some advice for future self. When you want to get this center panel back in, you can actually slide it in from the right. I tried pulling it forward and bringing it straight out, which was just a nightmare. But if you wiggle it, it'll just slide in from and out from the right hand side, and then you can just slide it across to its final location. So now I know that, a little bit more confident about getting that out next time. So most things back together now. So put the windscreen surround finisher back on. The way I did that was I just filled this with silicone, or sprayed this with silicone, popped that back on, got the bolts back on, got everything back on for the wiper mechanism, screwed these panels back on the left and the right, put these little end pieces in, and now we're just ready to do the top covers and put the box in for the heater. I'm not going to change that filter just now, I don't have another one, so I'll order another one up and change that another day, and put the turbo bracket back on. including that little bracket there, which I forgot, which holds the hose to that sensor. Okay, let's get that going. Last but not least, just leveling the car out. It's going to its high position. Needs the engine running, and it should just lock out when it gets to its normal raised condition. So you can see the difference for working on it. And I had this pallet stand on, which makes life a bit easier, but even then it's still a pain. Right, so all finished up now and given it a test run. Just gave it a bit of a wash down. And no leaks, and it is looking a lot better. So just a few more things to do. So I'm going to order up the cabin filter, order up the seal for the turbo and replace that. Might just show you how I do that. And I've also gone with the let's put a cloth under the turbo to stop the oil dripping routine, which I need to do a bit more research on and really try and find the best product to go under there. I don't think it's a fire risk. I've been doing it for quite a while, and it's a lot better than getting the oil down through the engine. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. One last bit at the end is just the spare parts that I had left over. So obviously the PCV pipes were spare, and so were the clips off that, and the temperature, I think it's a temperature valve that goes in that pipe. I've got my coupling, a few O-rings from the oil and the like there. We've got the bolts from the exhaust. We've got these spare gaskets didn't get used, so these came in my kit. Not sure exactly which model and where those go, but I didn't need those. I didn't put the O-rings on the injector bleed backs, and I ended up with a few spare large O-rings. I just didn't replace all of them. If they looked okay, they didn't look like they were going to leak. And then these are all the ones that I did replace. So we've got the exhaust Y manifold. We've got the main turbo exhaust there. We've got the EGR. We've got the turbo pedestal bottom, the turbo pedestal top, and the main gaskets, plus the non-leaky Viton oil cooler seals, and then the turbo pipe and the front of the mixer assembly. So it was all pretty good, and just one broken clip, well actually two, one on the heater hose, which I need to replace later, this small little one here that was on the coolant expansion pipe, and one spare screw. So if anybody can help me and tell me where I missed that, I'll be happy, because it's not back in the car and I can't remember where that went. But I do know that that one with those Torx dries in there were pretty rare, and they were generally around the front of the windscreen. Okay, so thanks for watching, and see you in the next video. Okay, so even though we did all of that change to everything, we've still got a slight oil leak. It's a bit confusing, but we're just going to look into that now. So I will be taking off the Y pipe, and I'll have a look at that, and I'll put some water down and wash everything out. I do think it's the seal that's leaking, so I have got some new OEM seals. These are much higher quality than the ones that I put in before, and I had to put the old one in. I think you might remember it was had the wrong seal, so we'll get those in, one of those, and we'll see how that goes for the leak from the top. I haven't had a look with my endoscope, couldn't quite see what's going on, but we're just going to go down underneath and see if we can see where the oil's leaking down to. Okay, I hope the video doesn't flip. So we can see it leaking here, which kind of makes sense because that would be leaking from the valley and down through the top. But what doesn't make as much sense, or maybe it does, is that it seems to be leaking across the bottom of the sump ridge there and then down and maybe off. But there's some oil up there I want to look at, because I don't know why that's got oil there, and there's some oil at the back. So I'll get this chocked up a little bit better and We're going to give it a wash underneath and have a look in a week, but let's see if we can see what's going on with that. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with what I can see down here. So the oil is pretty much coming down the side of the block. Seems to be coming over the bell housing rather than out of the back of the starter motor. It's running here across the transmission motor and then dripping down off the wires here. And then a bit hard to see, but up this side, it's running down the sump, down the edge of the sump. If I can get my finger in the right place. Down the edge of the sump, all the way down there. It's dripping off the sump onto the cross member and then dripping off the, the subframe, and then dripping off the subframe there. So all the oil is coming from the same place. I'll get this sprayed off with some degreaser and get up on the top of the engine, and we'll see if we can see where the oil's still coming from. Okay, sorry this is outside and a bit bright, but I was going to wash that off and get that degreased. So where I've got oil leaking from is definitely down from the center of the turbo and down. So that is from this seal, which as you can see is absolutely toast. So we'll get the new one of those in there. But also I've got a lot of oil dripping down from here. So I'm going to take this seal apart and see. That's coming in from the inlet. It's surprising because it's coming in and all the oil really should just go from here straight into the turbo and or sit in the bottom of here, but somehow it's getting up here into the air cleaner part of the air inlet manifold. I don't know if these seals are replaceable. I will look at that. Maybe I'll be getting a new rubber and a new seal, or maybe I'll get a whole new wide piece, but that would require the MAF sensors as well. So we'll have a look at that and see if we can work out what's going on.